Good afternoon. It's an honor for me to bring you this timeless story of love and sacrifice, the saga of the four chaplains. It was known as Torpedo Junction, the U-boat infested icy waters of North Atlantic during World War II. On February 3rd, 1948, the USAT Dorchester, an old coastal steamer quickly pressed into military service, was slowly making her way through those waters bound for Greenland. Most of the men were seasick and green with nausea because they were in submarine waters. The captain directed the men to keep our gear and life jackets on at all times. Moving among them were four Army chaplains: George Fox, Methodist; Alexander Good, Jewish; Clark Coley, Dutch Reformed; and John Washington, Roman Catholic. The chaplains talked with and listened to the men's soothing apprehensions, offering encouragement or sharing a joke. By their concern, their camaraderie with the men and one another, and their very presence, they brought solace. An enemy submarine stalking the ship undetected fired a torpedo towards the ship's aging flank. The missile exploded in the boiler room, destroying the electric supply and releasing suffocating clouds of steam and ammonia gas. Many on board died instantly. Some were trapped below deck. Others jolted from their bunks, roped and stumbled their way to the decks of the stricken vessel. Taking on water rapidly, the ship began listing to starboard. Because security reasons prevented the use of distress flares, escort vessels, still close enough to assist, pushed on into the darkness, unaware that the Dorchester was sinking. Overcrowded lifeboats capsized, rafts drifted away from before anyone could reach them. Men clung to rails, frozen with fear, unable to let go and plunge into the dark, churning water far below. The four chaplains calmed frightened men, got them into spare life jackets, and urged them over the side. The supply of extra jackets ran out with men still waiting. Having decided to remain with the sinking ship, the four chaplains either gave to or forced upon frightened servicemen their own life jackets. Too quickly, no more life jackets could be launched, and many men were left aboard, but there was more for the chaplains to do. When last seen, they were standing together on the deck, leading the men in prayer. With arms linked in friendship and heads bowed in prayer, they sank below the waves. Two of those chaplains were Protestant, one was a Catholic, and one was a Jew. Monsignor John McNamara, former Chief of Chaplains of the U.S. Navy, said at a Four Chaplains Award service, "No casting director in Hollywood could have selected a better cast of characters for these four to portray the basic unity of the American people." The self-sacrifice of the four chaplains was a heroic act. It was not the only heroic act aboard the Dorchester, but it was the identity of these four young men, representing three great faiths of the American people, that add symbolism to their sacrifice. It is our charge to see that this brief but significant portion of American history is not lost, and that the lessons of cooperation and selfless service are proclaimed. Glory be to God.
Thank you, John. At this time, we'll have the reading for Reverend George Fox by Tom.
Good afternoon. George Fox was the oldest chaplain. Up in Vermont, they called him the Little Minister because he was only 5 feet 7 inches tall. Back in 1917, he supposedly lied about his age and enlisted in the Army as a medical corps assistant. As a medical corps assistant during World War I, Fox was highly decorated for bravery and awarded the Silver Star, Purple Heart, and the French Croix de Guerre. Fox studied at Moody Institute, Illinois, Wesleyan, and Boston University School of Theology. He and his wife, Isidore, had 2 children. While serving as a pastor in Gilman, Vermont, he joined Walter G. Moore American Legion Post 41. He also served as the Legion State Chaplain and historian. Fox went on active duty August 8, 1942, the same day his son Wyatt enlisted in the Marine Corps. He was assigned to the chaplain school at Harvard and reported to the 411th Coast Artillery Battalion at Camp Davis in Holly Ridge, North Carolina. Before he boarded the Dorchester, he wrote a letter to his little daughter. She received it after the news that the ship was torpedoed. "I want you to know," he wrote, "how proud I am that your marks in school are so high. But always remember that kindness and charity and courtesy are much more important." I like this candle in the name of Lieutenant George L. Fox.
Thank you, Tom. Next, we'll have Hector tell us about Rabbi Good.
Good afternoon. Alexander D. Good was too young for World War I. While George Fox was winning medals on the battlefield in France, Alex Good was receiving medals in Eastern High School, Washington, D.C. for tennis, swimming, and track. He led his class in scholarships too. He planned to follow in his father's footsteps and become a rabbi, but that did not keep him from having a laughing, shouting, and hail fellow well-met boyhood with the Protestant and Catholic boys in his neighborhood. When the body of the unknown soldier was brought to Arlington Cemetery, Alex Good attended the ceremonies. He could just as well have ridden that 15 miles, for after all, there were trolleys and buses in Washington, and the Good family had a fine family car. But Alex thought it showed more respect to walk, and walk he did. All the way to Arlington and all the way back, 30 miles. That's how he felt about the unknown soldier. Even while training for his calling, he joined the National Guard and kept up with the active membership. He married his childhood sweetheart, and they had a daughter. After his call to a synagogue in York, Pennsylvania, he continued his studies at Johns Hopkins University, 45 miles away, and earned his PhD. One day in 1943, Mrs. Good received a telegram from her husband. "Having a wonderful experience," it read, and then Mrs. Good knew that her husband had found a warm companionship with the men and with whom he could share his faith and his laughter. I light this candle in honor of George Alexander Good.
At this time, Michael will tell us about Reverend Poling.
Good afternoon. Clark Poling was the youngest of our 4 men of God. Clark's first letter was written to his father. It was written in square block printing, excuse me, and was addressed by his mother. The letter found Dr. Poling February 1918 in a dugout on the Western Front of another world war. The letter read, "Dear Daddy, gee, I wish I was where you are. Love, Clark." And in exactly 25 years, that eager young little boy received his wish. Clark was the seventh generation of ministers in an unbroken line of the gospel. He was ordained in a Dutch Reformed church and was assigned to a parish in Schenectady, New York. He married a girl named Betty, and they had one little boy called Corky. A little girl was born to Mrs. Poling at Easter time after the Dorchester went down in February. When the war came along, he did not want to go as a chaplain. "I can carry a gun as well as the next guy," he told his father. "I'm not going to hide behind the church in some safe office away from the firing line." His father replied, "I think you're scared. Don't you know that the mortality rate of the chaplains is the highest of all? As a chaplain, you'll have the best chance in the world of being killed. The only difference is you can't carry a gun to kill anyone yourself." And so Clark Poling became a chaplain. Just before Clark sailed, he visited his father, and they were alone in Dr. Poling's study when Clark, turned to his father and said, "Dad, you know how much confidence I have in your prayers, but I don't want you to pray for my safe return. That wouldn't be fair. Many will not return, and to ask God for special family favors would not be fair. No, Dad, don't pray for my safe return. Just pray that I shall do my duty, and something more. Pray that I shall never be a coward. Pray that I shall have the strength and courage and the understanding of men, and especially pray that I shall be adequate." Dr. Poling tells us that was his last prayer he prayed for Clark, and that Clark was adequate. He taught his men not to bear personal hatred for Germans and Japanese soldiers or civilians. His text was simple: hate the system that made your brother evil. It is the system that we must destroy. I light this candle in memory of Lieutenant Clark Poling.
Thank you, Mike. At this time, we'll have a reading for Reverend Washington by Walter.
Johnny P. Washington. Up in Newark, New Jersey, there once was a little boy named Johnny Washington. Things usually aren't easy for poor immigrants folk, but Johnny had his father's Irish grin and his mother's Irish stick-to-itiveness, and Johnny sold newspapers. Sure, he liked to play ball just as much as the rest of the kids on the block. But if he took time off from the newspaper route, it was just so many pennies less to take home to Mom. And there were 9 mouths in the Washington household to be fed. Johnny loved music and sang in the church choir. And Johnny loved to fight. It must have been about the time he decided to become a priest that he was the leader of the South 12th Street Boys in Newark, a position which required not only moral persuasion, but on occasion, a black eye and a bloody nose. And Johnny was always laughing, right through his training as a priest and after he was ordained. He played ball in the streets with the boys from his parish. He organized baseball teams. And when the war came along and his boys went into the army, Father Johnny went right along with them, as a matter of course. They say that when the Dorchester went down, he was still laughing and singing and praying to comfort those who could not reach the lifeboats. I light this candle for Johnny P. Washington.
that tells the story of our four chaplains.